Hello, Sunshines, and welcome to this episode of Cool House Connection. I'm Deb Deckhand, your host, and I'm really glad you've joined us because today I'm going to deliver on my promise to you with an update on the Spanish project. Last time we were traveling Argentina and Buenos Aires and Bariloche and being inspired by the little details that really made a difference in the gorgeous homes all over that enclave. But I've got a beautiful home and a beautiful space right in front of us, and that's the progress, that's the renovation that we're currently underway on. When we talked about the Spanish house, several months ago, it was livable. It had good tall ceilings, and it had a fabulous, albeit dark, upper story. Well, a lot has happened since then, and I'm happy to report that as of today, not only has the really special detailing of this space unearthed itself thanks to the hands and skills of some incredible, talented construction folks who really appreciate old structures, but the light is starting to shine through, the space is starting to take shape, and we're starting to get really excited now that the demolition phase is done about what the reconstruction and reconfiguration and reimagination is going to look like. But before I get into the specifics of what and where the renovation is, it's important to step back and understand what has to happen in the current locale before we can fully embrace and engage in what the new locale looks like. And that gets me to consolidation and downsizing. As with everyone, once you've lived in a home, in a space, things take over. You tend to put too much in. You tend to fill up every space. You tend to look for the vacuums and find a way to fill them with whatever strikes your fancy at the moment. Budget, always a consideration, but not always withstanding. That's happened to the house here in North Carolina. And even though we tried really hard to only put things in places where we had them, as we look around, we can see that it's still a bit crowded. It's got a few too many cool things tucked away in every space that you look at. And the problem with that is it gives the eye very little place to rest and restore. So as we think about this shift to Spain, we think about how can we scale back what's here in the house in North Carolina and transport it over there to where it perhaps is a better fit, or at least has the space to breathe. And that downsizing includes things like favorite chairs. It includes things like fabric pieces. It includes clothing. It includes dishes. It includes crystal. All those things are important to recognize that not everything fits where you think it will, when you think it will. So there's been a big project underway to try to rationalize. The other reality of consolidation and downsizing is that it costs money to ship stuff. So while it's tempting to think, I'll just fill up a residence somewhere else with new stuff and new old stuff and old new stuff that you find on Marketplace, when you have your favorites and you think about shipping, that becomes a pretty big deal. because every cubic foot has a number attached to it. The next part of what we've been going through involves thinking through every single solitary inch of where we're moving to. And I don't mean just the layout. I mean every solitary inch from the floor to the ceiling, to the colors, to the light and how it shines, to where the artwork goes and how the artwork will be lit and which furniture goes where. It goes on and on. Now for me, that's the fun part. Because I can look at a layout, I can look at a floor plan, I can look at measurements, and I can begin to visualize exactly how that space will evolve. Now, some people count sheep as they're trying to go to sleep. That's not how I roll. Instead of counting sheep, what I count is what will a space look, and more importantly, what will a space feel like. I'm happy to tell you that I think I'm making great progress on this particular aspect. And as I shop for things that will ship from here, and I shop for things that will acquire over there, I'm able to see in my mind exactly how the space will evolve. So thinking through the furnishings and where everything's going to go and what fits and what doesn't is really just one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is figuring out the structural pieces. And that's been a little more interesting. For example, I told you a moment ago that the ceilings when we acquired the place were nice and high, and that's absolutely true. But not quite high enough for what I was thinking. And as it turns out, when we ripped away what turned out to be a false ceiling, what we found was another 10 inches of headroom. And this is really important on the main floor for a couple of reasons. One, underneath that false ceiling were structural old beams with plaster over reeds and bamboo. And when you see it, if you're wired at all like I am, you just go, oh my gosh, that's gorgeous, we have to save it. And so we did. We reinforced where we needed to, and we took advantage of that extra high room, and we put plaster between the ribs. And what that's enabled us to do is keep the old with the new, and give a backdrop for the ceiling that was never there before. I mean, it was always there, but it was never there. The other piece, and I credit the architect fully for this, is exposing the rock wall. When I first told you about this place, I told you that it had thick, 2-foot thick limestone walls, and that's absolutely true on the first floor, as it's known in Europe, or the second floor, as we think about it in the US. But what I didn't realize at the time was on the ground floor, which is the US's first floor, is that underneath the exterior walls and the plaster, and in some cases it was damaged plaster, whatever. But as they began to rip that away, what they exposed was these solid rock walls, which are the exterior and pieces of the interior. And where that becomes really important is in places like the dining room, which gives walls with both a smooth finish, it will be a smooth finish, and also the original rock walls. Now, whether we paint those rock walls, whether we paint some of those rock walls, whether we leave them in the natural state, still to be determined. But it completely changes the character of the room. And turns out we've got those rock walls that we can take advantage of, not only in the dining room, but also in part of the guest suite, and also in the Catalonian arch, which is underneath the staircase. So that gets very exciting when you start thinking about, do you cover those walls with art or furniture, or do you leave them fully exposed? Where do you warm it up? Where do you cool it down? All those kinds of textural things that make for the final finishes. The final thing that I'll tell you about, which is probably going to be one of the single most interesting features of this particular residence, is the entrance to the dining room, or as we call it, the drama room. Now, I always knew that I wanted this dining room to be high impact. I knew that I wanted to do that in terms of color, in terms of a chandelier, in terms of a really cool table that mirrored the corners of the room. What I did not know until I spent some time on site was that by putting a simple concrete beam at the highest point of the ceiling in the entrance way, we were able to move from standard, slightly oversized French doors to something which I think is going to be just gobsmackingly gorgeous. And that is high arched sliding doors with a mirrored finish facing the main room that slide back to reveal this drama room. And this particular idea came from seeing it done in a very old museum. And once you see it and you begin to visualize it and you think, wow, do you think we could really do that in our place? And then you look at structurally what you have to work with and how you can modify that, suddenly the lights go on and you've got something that'll be, I think, incredibly exciting for everyone who lives and visits the space. So anyway, that's what we're up to. That was the progress a couple of months ago. The progress continues in terms of revealing the rock walls, finishing the fine-tuning of all of the demolition piece of it, and getting it ready for now the absolutely most exciting part, which is restoring it and achieving the vision that we collectively are coming to about what that particular home wants to be. So that's the news from Spain. Thank you all for listening to the update. Thank you for sharing my excitement. And thank you for listening to this episode of Cool House Connection. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. And until then, stay cool.